chill coming in the air a little bit right now, but not here. We keep things nice and warm and cuddly and toasty on the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's Penn Foundation. I'm trying here, folks. First of all, hold on. We have to backtrack a little bit. I tell everybody to roll in the background before we actually even start this show, because there should be a podcast off of the podcast, like the sidebar conversation. I'm not going to get into anybody's personal information here, but we have gone on an emotional roller coaster before this podcast has even started.
Just wait.
With that said, hello, Amy Allenson Dundon and Jody McLeod-Misser. How are we today?
I'm a little sore, but I'm good. How are you, Amy?
I'm good, Jody. I'm glad you're here and with us and all as well.
Thank you. Appreciate
Glad
that.
you're here. You'd have to, again, we'll do a sidebar podcast another time.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we are here to have a serious conversation, and we're going to follow up on our conversation about change. We had a conversation about change a little while back, and just how change can result in different kinds of feelings, negative feelings, positive feelings. We kind of touched on all those in the last episode of the podcast. But today we're just going to look at how to create change in our lives. I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that maybe could be a positive step towards making changes in your own life, and maybe something that you feel like is a negative hindrance. So I'm actually just going to start with a really basic question. Amy, I'll start with you on this one. Well, change in yourself, how would you define change in yourself and the approach that one might take if you're getting ready to think about making some changes?
So for me, when you asked me that, I was thinking about me specifically. But I guess this checks out for most people. It's when I really have a loss of control in a situation, decisions that are going to be made by someone else, a change in my body as we age, right? Changes in metabolism, in health, and kind of watching the people around me as we all age experience the changes that come with aging. And so I think it's a loss of control. I guess I loop back around to say it's feeling like I can't affect the outcome of something in a way that doesn't produce anxiety, I guess.
Jody, I'm going to go ahead and follow up on that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who right now feel like perhaps they would like to encourage change in their lives due to recent events. And again, to come back to the point that Amy just made, there's a loss of control. You can't affect the outcome. You can really only control what you can control. Can we kind of maybe go into that a little bit, and how your own personality might play a role in that? Because I think for some people, it might feel like a situation is way bigger than them. And for some people, it might be like, okay, here's my little box. Here's what I can do with my little box, and take that with me as I go.
I'm sure personality, personal experience, what has happened in the past frames how you handle change and how you view change. Mm-hmm. And I think we know that individuals who've experienced positive change certainly may come into a change situation with that same attitude as being a positive attitude. And for other people who have experienced change that has been life-altering in a bad way, are going to have that kind of feeling of dread as they head into that. I think what's difficult is when you think perhaps something's going to go in a certain direction, and that's the change that's going to come, and that isn't what happens.
Yeah. We have this kind of fantasy of the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. And what that change is going to look like or should look like, right? And anytime we start using words shoulds, musts, have tos, we start getting into that irrational zone. And it takes us down it can take us down a pretty dark place.
Yeah,
when we get in our heads about it.
And change can have, maybe it doesn't have the best, it doesn't make you feel good.
It can,
but maybe it doesn't, but that doesn't mean it wasn't necessary. I guess is my point, right?
Yeah.
So there's a book that I just finished. It was funny because a friend of mine gave me a book called Necessary Endings. It's by Dr. Henry Cloud. And the reality of this entire book is about things that have to end or change in order to move forward. And Dr. Henry Cloud talks about necessary endings creating change as an example of a rose bush, and how sometimes you have to change the good things about the rose bush and the bad things about the rose bush in order for the remainder of the rose bush to flourish. Now, I'm not a gardener, so he does go into depth just saying that when you prune a rose bush, you get rid of the dead. You also get rid of some of the healthy so that the rest of the bush can become even healthier. And that means you have to end good things and bad things to make the overall experience better. And I highly recommend the book. Again, it's Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. And it really makes you think differently about ending certain things because there's a greater win to it.
It sounds like it's opened up your mind to just be less resistant.
Oh, that's absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So even things that are very successful or doing very well, maybe in one aspect of your life or of your work or of a relationship, just because that's going well doesn't mean that it doesn't need to end, because it can help this side of that business or relationship be even better. So yeah, it really does give perspective to endings, change being necessary, and allowing everything else to get bigger and better.
Which really speaks to looking at the big picture, right? I mean, if I can get out of my own way and look further down the road at whether it's a change in my family, whether it's a change in my business, whether it's a change in my health, what do I have to change now so that further down the road, things are just going to be so much better. So yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Kind of an idea of almost like self-awareness, because to your point, Jody, you could be thriving at work and doing all the things you've wanted to do in your career, but at the sacrifice of perhaps time with your family or things of that nature. Can we talk a little bit about how self-awareness can play a big role in change? Because you may feel like something's got to change, or someone in your life may feel like something's got to change, and that first step isn't always the easiest. And I think part of that again is maybe comes back to your own personality, as we kind of touched on a little bit. The self-awareness that's necessary for change, understanding what you have going on in your own thoughts, just kind of how we can approach change, in including our own self-awareness in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person and what that is, right? I mean, if I'm thinking about somebody that maybe needs to change drinking habits, for example, denial is a really strong thing. And I think if we think about it in that context, denial really does flow over into all of the changes in our lives, right? To, that first initial, oh, I don't need to stop drinking, or we don't need to go down that path, or, it's working just fine the way it is. And it's that initial, those stages of grief, if you will, because it's, when we change something, it's, did I just take your...
I can't believe, no, you didn't take it. No. It was as if, I feel like she's...
I can't...
reading my notes.
My eyes, I
my
can't
notes
see.
over here.
I've got a camera behind you guys to see who's peeking at whose notes.
Yeah.
No, it's just interesting. Go ahead, talk about grief. No, please.
Okay, so I guess what part of change, any change, whether it's, if you're a rose bush gardener, person, listen, all respect.
If you have a
to
rose bush.
Yes. I'm not good with plants, as
I never promised you
a rose garden, no. So I think if you can let go of and go through the stages of grieving for what you're going to lose, knowing your crop will be bigger, better, fuller, right? And you can move through those stages of grieving, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and in all sorts of stages. That's where then the freeing part of cutting off the healthy portion, and doing it while saying something very healthy and positive to yourself, like this is okay, change is good, this is going to make me better, and those positive affirmations. But it really is grieving that change you have to make because it's been a part of you for so long.
I'm so excited that you said grief, and I never thought those words would ever come out of my mouth. But in the same, and I'm going to reference it because these are not my thoughts, these are just things that I've picked up. According to Dr. Henry Cloud, the important piece of change and of ending is grief, because grief is it's a process. Grief is a process. It's not just an emotion. So you're not just feeling grief and that's all. Grief is a process where you go through, anger, but the grief process is getting unstuck. Right. And so, he talks about cathexis, and I did not know what that word meant. So here's the definition, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't either. But cathexis is defined as the investment of mental or emotional energy in a person, object, or idea. And when you invest that kind of energy in something and it changes or it ends, you actually have to go through decathexis, where you're loosening the emotional bonds with that someone or something. And that is most effective through the grief process.
I love that word. That's going to be my new word. I love that word. And when you were talking about that, my first thought was empty nest syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. And you invest as parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles, or you invest so much in the kiddos, and then one day they spread their wings and they fly, mm-hmm. right? And you're left holding that cathexis ball. And so yes, and it's a grief process, right? It's a not all loss is bad loss, but it's still loss.
And here's where personalities come into play. And you can check this. We can fact check this with my children. My son moved out. His room was a yoga room within 24 hours. Saged. I'm telling you, saged and everything. That was my decathexis, was right. Loosening the emotional bonds, both physically with the objects that had been in the room, but also certainly the human whom I adore and love and all those pieces. But that was sort of how I processed through that. Now, some would argue, my children, that it was really quick. And they're not wrong. But I do think that's where personality, and that's where how you handle and have experienced change is different for everyone. In my experience, people moving out of a home, it was always positive. Mm-hmm. It was because there was success, or there was something good happening. I imagine that for some people who have experienced someone leaving the household unexpectedly, or perhaps a separation or anything like that, that person leaving feels very different.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that denial and bargaining stage lasts longer, for
right.
sure.
I guess that's what to be fair, it lasts longer than 24 hours.
If I leave the room the way that it was, then right. It's not really ending yet.
Right.
Right. Or I'm going to give it 6 months and then I'll revisit it. And that's bargaining, right? That's all part of healing, to your point. And everybody is different, mm-hmm.
Can we talk about, because I think that kind of leads into the idea of perhaps people considering therapy. If people are looking for their own motivation to go, Jody, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Why are you laughing, Rocket?
You were ready to just move all that stuff out within 24 hours. And Amy, to your point, there are some people who are like, I want to keep this room exactly how it is. And maybe there's, Jody, your ability to move on and help facilitate change for yourself is an important part of, we keep coming back to the rosebush gardener person, as I wrote it down here. So can we talk about it on the other side then, for people that maybe are having that tough time moving on and are giving a bit of resistance to the idea of moving forward, the role that therapy can help play in that. And maybe part of that is the idea of therapy in and of itself. Maybe it's something you haven't done before. Maybe it's, we have it written down here, the idea that you need to be ready for it, ready for change. Part of that change might be therapy. Just the first steps in kind of taking a deep breath and saying, okay, there's an element of my life that I need to kind of find in my own control again, and how can I do that, and the role that therapy can play in that. Amy, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Can I go first before we go technical?
Absolutely. Jody,
Sorry.
I can go ahead and start with
Thank you. No, I'm just going to say that I don't, in my layperson's opinion, I don't know that there's a certain time element that is a trigger to someone being unhealthy. Someone could argue that me changing it within 24 hours says something. Mm-hmm. Some could say that, waiting 6 months says something. But I think facilitating the change first has to start with perspective. And in my opinion, before you go down the road of therapy, there's almost a point where you need to evaluate the impact or what you are hoping will happen. And I guess what I mean by that is it's okay to be sad that your loved one moved out. Mm-hmm. If your son, I'll use the example of like a son. Like, it's okay that they moved out. It's okay that they got their own apartment. But I think you need to recognize at what point that change is impacting you. Meaning, maybe you go in there and you sit in the room for a long period of time and you cry for hours on end. Like, that seems to me that might require some attention. But I don't know that we actually can put a time limit. So I think I just want to say that so that people who are listening, they're going, oh my gosh, like my kid moved out and I didn't turn it into a yoga room in 24 hours. I need therapy.
My kid still has trophies on his shelf, and he's in law school.
Yeah, let's be clear. My daughter's room has her prom queen, or whatever, crown in it. Yeah. So I got you. Yeah.
So
You didn't move that over to the yoga room when that happened?
No, she comes back and checks.
Okay.
It's creepy.
Okay,
it's creepy. She's like, oh, I see you moved my
crown.
Crown?
I see you moved my crown.
I'm like, sorry about that.
Wow.
But therapy, sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
To your point, I don't think therapy is necessary. If therapy was necessary for all of us for every change that happened, we would all be in therapy perpetually for our entire life. So just because you're experiencing change, but to Jody's point, when you get stuck and you need to help get unstuck, right? That's where therapy can come in. If you think about it, we know that the 5 biggest life stressors, things in life that changes in life that cause the most anxiety are death of a loved one, divorce or separation, moving, long-term illnesses, and job loss.
And some of those are good.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. And so if you can process all of those things in a really healthy way, you might not necessarily need therapy. And I'll tell you from a therapist, an old therapist perspective, I think what I see as kind of the number one key to being able to grow from change is trust and connection.
With who?
Anyone. Okay? I don't mean anyone like an axe murderer or anyone, but anyone.
I'm so glad Amy has clarified that having a trust and connection.
Wait, no, I got to get that axe murder out of my phone.
Listen, we're just getting off of Halloween and spooky season, which I love. So, so connection and trust.
Feels like a full moon. So
no, I'm listening. Wait, I need a minute. I need like 20 seconds to. Right now, I'm going through the people I trust and have connections with, and I'm going to need to verify their criminal history at this point in time. But sorry, carry on. No,
listen. You do therapy for 30 years, you're just not right.
That's
just what happens.
Great.
Right? We try our best.
And scene.
And that's the just start.
That's just the start. No,
I think
perspective.
It's perspective, but it's also who do I trust and who do I connect with that's outside of me, that I can make sure I'm not isolating, that I can make sure I'm being honest with, that I can make sure that I have someone to go to and talk to, not even necessarily about the change, just to have connection.
No, I think that makes sense, because there are often times when I will find someone to talk to that really has no connection at all to the situation, and I will walk through the situation to gain their perspective. And I trust their knowledge of who I am, and I trust their feelings towards how I'm behaving. So I that makes sense. And I think you can do the same with people who do, let's say there's a change in your family, a separation. You use a separation example. You're not necessarily going to go to your husband's mom to discuss it, but you could be talking to an aunt or a cousin or something like that, someone you trust and someone who you can confide in and gain perspective.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the idea of finding that trustworthy connection, and flip it to the other side as the person that may be on the outside looking in at someone. We come back to the idea of processing in a healthy way. If you're a person that's on the other side of that, someone who considers yourself to be a trustworthy confidant, somebody that somebody can lean into, and you're seeing that someone's not processing something in a very healthy way, some of the steps that you can take to help that person kind of one of the phrases I use in our house sometimes is, if I feel like my wife has anxiety, is like, change your scene, shake things up a little bit, get out of the house, don't be right where you are, find something to do, like let's go do something. I don't care if we just go for a walk, let's change things up a little bit. For the person that's not maybe necessarily the person that's feeling stressed or anxious, the other side of that, when you see that in somebody, a way to approach that, and perhaps, we obviously come back to, I think all three of us would agree that we could talk to professionals anytime about what's going on in our lives. But maybe being that person that suggests, hey, why don't you go and try to talk to somebody? Why don't you try to change something up for yourself a little bit to get out of the kind of spinning wheel that you're in right now?
Well, I think it starts with the question or the statement, I'm worried about you. And it can be as, that might be all that person needs to be like, okay, other people are saying this too. What is this about? What do I need? But it's really, I think, about we've done not so great of a job historically in sugarcoating things. I know this isn't an episode about suicide, but we ask people to, when you're worried about someone, especially with suicide, you say, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?"
Right.
And it never used to be that plain language, right? But we know that that's what works.
Right.
Right. So when somebody, and that's very extreme, I understand that, but to that end, if I see a friend who I'm like, oh, they are not okay, and I'm going to sit back and watch for a little bit, and then I'm going to jump in. Or I'm going to maybe reach out to one of their loved ones, or I'm going to invite them out for coffee or whatever, and just have that conversation, recognizing that it's real possible that they're going to work through this on their own if you can provide some trust and connection.
Right. I think it's also knowing that you're seen, right? I think for the person who's being asked, even if when someone says, I'm worried about you, you look at them and say, why? That person's opening the door for you to share what you're seeing. So I would say, if you are going to be talking to someone because you're concerned about them, be prepared to answer the next question that may come, which is why. What do you see? And you should be able to express, I've noticed that you're distracted. I noticed that everything that comes out of your mouth is negative or kind of doomsaying. And, I've just noticed those things about you, and I'm concerned. I think that it's very easy to say, hey, Amy, I'm worried about you. And rather than putting someone on the defensive and saying, you're really acting like a jerk.
Right.
That makes somebody feel very defensive.
Yeah. So I think, to your point, be able to back up what you're seeing. And, maybe it's behaviors. Maybe it's, gosh, you've been really quiet when you're usually not, or, I see you kind of taking a step back, or I'm worried that, you seem a little bit sad and depressed and withdrawn, and that's not who you are. And, it's okay to point that stuff out. That's important.
Yeah. And I do think too, there are elements to individuals' lives that we think we know everything, especially if they're a very good friend, or they're a wife, or they're a husband, or they're your child. We make the assumption that we know everything that's going on, and you could be very surprised by what comes back. It goes back to investing a lot of mental and emotional energy into something. That's not necessarily visible to someone else, right? Like you are not aware of what I am investing my mental and emotional energy in. Mm-hmm. It's not visible necessarily.
Right.
So maybe I'm investing mental and emotional energy on simply cleaning out my house and cleaning out my closets, and I'm struggling with just throwing away things that I've had for years. Do you know what I mean? Like it could be that easy. The only thing I did was my closet, and the big bag's still sitting in my hallway. But so we haven't officially purged. But like that can be really emotional for people. And then you maybe start to, and this is not me. I just want to caveat, this is not what I'm experiencing. But I'm saying you don't know what that does for someone.
Right.
Because you're not there. Mm-hmm. So saying you're worried and giving them the opportunity to express that, I think, is important. And it could also be like, I actually don't feel good. I've been having migraines for like 6 weeks. Yeah. You're right. I have been quiet. I don't feel good.
Yeah.
I fell down the steps.
I fell down the
steps.
I didn't want to say it, but when you said there was a big bag in the hallway, I was like, man, this
no.
Add up, isn't it?
Different hallway.
Oh, different. Well, watch out for that one too.
I know.
I want to come to, look, the time of year that we're in right now is the holiday season. And typically that is twinkly lights and jingle bells. And for some, maybe this is the first holiday season where, we bring up, maybe you've gotten separated. Someone has passed away. Someone has moved out. We've kind of touched on all those. This holiday season could be a particularly difficult one, especially if somebody's going through something, or it could be a difficult one for any number of reasons, not necessarily just because it's the first one. But I guess maybe just if I were to ask the two of you, the first thing that you feel like is good for someone to do if they do feel like they're getting in a rut. We've talked about cleaning. My wife, that's her thing. She gets anxious. I know when she's got a lot of things going on in her head, because all of a sudden I'll hear the vacuum going. I'll hear things start to.
My husband wishes that was my anxiety.
Well, what'll happen is, like, I will have vacuumed in like the morning, and then she will go back, and I'm like, I love
how Crockett thinks that that's her anxiety, and not that maybe he vacuumed wrong.
Listen, I've seen the two of us vacuum. I've got the vacuuming down.
Wow. That's confidence.
Those are big words right there.
That said the one who fell down the steps. That said, just the first thing that you would suggest to people who are feeling, I'll come back to that word, ruttish, feeling a little bit in a rut. Just one of the first things that maybe you would suggest that says, hey, try to find something, go do something. Just what might that be, the first thing that you would recommend for somebody who is maybe a little bit in their feels, particularly this time of year?
So I'm going to say the non-therapist thought that comes into my head. And that would be that it's okay for that holiday or this holiday coming up to not be perfect, because it probably never was, but in your vision it was when that person was around, but in reality it probably wasn't. But it's okay for it not to be perfect. And it's also okay to change it, to do it differently, to create a new tradition or to add something to it. It doesn't have to remain the same. And I think back to, and this is not a holiday necessarily, but I remember my mom's first birthday after my brother had passed away. So my brother's birthday, it was the first one after my brother died. And, we always had cake, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but you always had cake on someone's birthday. And she was like, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I want to have cake for him. And I said, then have cake for him. And she's like, yeah, but don't you think people are going to think that's weird? And I'm like, who cares?
Right.
I think it's sort of like the who cares in
Yeah.
that moment, right? It's what do you need in those moments? And it's okay. Again, it goes back to if that starts to become a concern and you get fixated, that's different. This was many years ago. She no longer has cake on his birthday, right? She acknowledges his birthday. She'll, of course, in her own quiet way, sing happy birthday to him, all those pieces, but there's no longer cake.
Right.
It's changed. So I think when you come into a holiday season, it doesn't have to change, but it can, and that's all right. And it's okay to feel different. I don't know.
Kind of like the rose bush, right?
Kind of like the rose bush.
It's okay to make a change to something that feels wrong or it feels unsettling, knowing that it's going to help you be healthier and brighter on the other side. And it's, again, for me, it comes back to connection. I don't have to necessarily connect with whatever those traditions were before, but maybe I can connect by an act of service in the community for the holiday and going and serving at a food kitchen or how can I feel a sense of purpose?
Yeah.
Right? Purpose, connection, trust, and really self-care, Crockett. I think taking care of yourself first, going to the doctor, asking the questions you're avoiding asking, having those difficult conversations with your primary care doc.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about that enough. I agree with you, Amy. I think, Crockett, that's something that we don't talk about enough. And I would say number one, you should get a primary care physician if you don't have one. Get a family doc. And then talk to them. Share with them, I'm having trouble sleeping, or this doesn't feel good anymore, or something's here. Like, you not just go in, get your weight, get your height, get your blood pressure. How are things? Fine. Okay, I saw your labs. Talk to them.
Yeah.
They're your first line.
Hey, I've noticed this pain here for a long time and I just haven't said anything, or I feel this lump somewhere and I've been avoiding it.
Or hey, Christmas is coming up and I'm really sad about
Right.
having Christmas without my family, or I'm really worried about something. I'm sure Mary Harris, who's our vice president within the primary care world, is like, we have people you can come to.
Yeah.
Get an appointment with a established primary care.
Nothing is off limits with your physicians. They've heard it all. Don't
Right.
think, well, I'm embarrassed to talk about being sad, or I'm embarrassed that I can't change this old routine, or I'm embarrassed that I'm depressed, or I'm embarrassed that I haven't talked about this medical issue for so long. I've let it go.
Isn't it amazing though? Like, you're embarrassed until there's a point where other people can see it, and now you have to talk about it. Meaning, like, maybe you've been having this pain, but then somebody's like, why are you moving your arm like that? And you're like, oh my gosh, speak up. I think speaking up, but that goes to your emotional health as well, Crockett. I think when you're seeing your primary care physician, you need to be letting them know what you're experiencing. Give them an opportunity to engage and look into other things, especially if your family goes to the same office. It just gives them a full perspective of that familial engagement. And I think we overlook it. I really do.
Yeah, and then I think, and again, it comes back to connection. You can that's one person you could connect with this week. You could make an appointment generally and in the next week or so for yourself, but it's also your place of religion or spiritual wellness. If you haven't connected there, and that was something that used to maybe be meaningful to you, but maybe you've reduced that activity or given it up, find a way to connect, find a way to have a sense of purpose for yourself.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's an excellent spot to wrap this one up. So thank you both. I think that, listen, and if it is a situation where maybe you are noticing something in someone and you haven't maybe had a good conversation in a while, If it's around the Thanksgiving table and there's 20, 25, you got one of those big old family shindigs and somebody's sitting there not looking so happy to be there, it could probably go a long way if you go up and start a conversation and see if you can help out in that way. I love the idea of volunteering. Hopefully that can bring some happiness to your heart, whatever you're doing this holiday season. And I just think that's an excellent spot to wrap this one up. So thank you both. Those were really great points. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's Penn Foundation. For Jody McLeod-Mismer and Amy Allenson-Dundon, my friends, and shout out to all the Rose Bush Gardner persons that were out there listening to us today.
Rock on.
Thank you. I appreciate you both. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all that good stuff to you both. This is the Just Start the Conversation podcast.